let's get started with the first presentation. So the title, as you see, Creating Ideal Cities for the Architecture Biennale. We were invited by a team of architecture theorists and historians that have the opportunity to exhibit at the Architecture Biennale, to be part of the team and help building some three-dimensional ideal worlds. So it has a lot to do with understanding space and working with space in a creative, but also in some sort of philosophical context. So it's the Ideal Spaces Working Group. So we are part of that team now. There's the website for those that are interested to go and see some more of the content. There's a couple of people involved, and so they already have exhibited 2016, and they were actually nominated for a prize, which is very, very, it's a very prestigious thing. And here is one of the worlds that they have created. This is a functional city by Leonardo da Vinci. It's basically a reconstruction. And then a couple of other worlds. One of them is an idealized version of the actual real world constructed Karlsruhe. And Motopia is also one of those ideal cities that were developed by the group. The reason why I was approached was the favela project that I had done a couple of years ago together with Cyril, and they were for the 2016 exhibition, they were telling a tale about multiple worlds, and one of the counterpoints, because they are talking about ideal worlds or ideal spaces, and they wanted to make a counterpoint, and one of their team members actually found the favela. And then you're starting to think about, is there a place for a favela to be shown next to ideal cities, because there are some difficulties there, but it's about the discourse, right? So they actually asked me to provide a part of the model that we had created, and that was then actually exhibited in this space next to other presentations. There was like a sandbox that could be used to model topographies that actually created some sort of interactive cities also. So that was a very prestigious invite. Now, I'm just quickly showing the video that was made with our specific part. This year's topic is artificial natures. So what does that mean? What does the term mean? Because they are somehow contradictory. One is artificial, so basically made by humans, and nature, which is made by nature. And so this is one of the main topics for this year's exhibition, is basically the contrast between the completely artificial, you could almost say the concrete jungle, and the actual natural jungle, and anything in between would be basically garden cities. So there was in the theoretical approach to this exhibition, this was one of the main topics. So I'm going to show you two of the worlds that we are currently building. They are not basically final quality. The stuff is not yet finished. So this is basically work in progress imagery. The first world is the Burle Marx Park. So this guy here, Roberto Burle Marx, he's a painter and landscape architect, and he painted a lot of different images, or that was basically his style. But he was also, as he is also a landscape architect, he tried to actually convert the images or see more in the images than just the forms and the paintings. But he really had a very, very strong, or he connected that the ideas with the physical nature of gardens. And he has built a lot of different parks. Some of the elements, like these columns, are coming from one of the historians in the team. So we are trying to make our own imprint in the exhibition, not just to copy or replicate elements of other people's work, but really try to make this our own exhibition. So these are some of the paintings of potential, or of different types of floral columns. So this is one of the, or it's some sort of reconstruction, the Burle Marx Park, that is built actually in reality, but we have created a reconstruction of the place with our own interpretation. So there are a lot of different elements, like for example the columns that we have mentioned. There are other columns that Burle Marx himself actually designed and constructed and placed. The whole look of the Biennale, as we are creating multiple worlds, had to have some sort of stylized but still very abstract style of presenting the world. So you can see actually the arc in the story by looking at multiple worlds at the same time. So that's the first one. And the second one that was chosen to be exhibited was Tel Aviv in the 1930s. So on the top right, you see the so-called Geddes plan, which was originally designed by Patrick Geddes in 1931. What is actually very important to see is that there is no real city center, but there are a lot of green spaces and let's say clusters of vegetation in between the buildings. And there was basically cluster after cluster after cluster. And so basically like this, you can build an entire city that could be as big as you would like, but you still have a very, very natural space. And this is per se an artificial nature, or a garden city, you could say. There's a very famous square, the Dizengoff Square, that has pretty much, or there are only a couple of really important landmark buildings that was decided to actually include in the Biennale. So we created a couple of these buildings around this square, and you see the rest of the city fabric is actually pretty homogeneous. So this is the reconstruction that we are currently working on. There's still a little bit many palm trees, so we are going to change that. But this is basically one of the views into one of the directions. We have been working on just developing CityEngine rule sets to construct buildings that are somehow geotypical to Tel Aviv, and so these are some early tests that we made, and these buildings actually contain a lot of the feature called local edits that we have been working, or that we have been trying to work with or get the best out of it for having very, very specific buildings modeled. And then there's just another picture I wanted to add. It's one of the so-called arcade worlds. It's also a separate world, but this is basically just one perspective that was taken from an original painting and then translated or transposed basically into a three-dimensional representation. Again, with very abstract architecture, so that's a very, very deliberate element. And then the pixelized vegetation, just to imply certain types of vegetation. The city is also very deliberately not finished or not ended up here, so there are no buildings continued there. So it's like basically an open piece of art where you could imagine how the city would continue into infinity or around the globe, for example. Regarding the vegetation, that was actually one of the quite challenging aspects, because there are multiple people working on the project, and everybody has different ideas of how vegetation should look. Should it look more realistic? Should it look more abstract? So we have developed multiple styles of vegetation, and then it was basically decided to settle with this type of representation for the vegetation. And this is basically it's a part. It's not all of them. There are more hanging elements or hanging vegetation types that we have developed after the screenshot was taken. But there are different the different elements that are basically distributed. Then, based on these buildings or the vegetation, the so-called pixels, they were actually distributed using or created using CityEngine. And then we have created our own internal script to generate multiple levels of detail for the faraway distance. So we made that in Maya afterwards. So if you have time, please go to Venice to visit the Architecture Biennale. The show is on between end of May and end of November 2018. That's basically it. Are there some questions regarding this? Don't be shy.
I have one.
Yes.
So you use local edits for those houses there?
Yes.
Can you give an example? Why you needed local edits, or what was the benefit of it?
Yeah, so just for the recording, I'm going to repeat the question. So why did we use local edits, and what was the benefit? The very specific benefit to us was that, or why we chose to use it, is that the architecture has to be spot on in the sense of the distribution and the amount of windows to place them so that they actually look contemporary to the specific epoch or architectural style. And we just wanted to experiment with the functionality to actually place certain elements of the facades manually, compared to the traditional approach with procedural modeling, where you can generate patterns upon patterns upon patterns, just in a randomized version. The thing is where I believe, also as an architect, or just the point is, if you want to have control over multiple levels of facade structures, it's to me still a little bit tricky to encode that entirely with procedural codes. Because if you imagine, if you need to reconstruct a very specific style of facade, you have the main facade, and then you say, okay, I would like to have first an L-shaped structure, just a main facade division. And then you want to have either windows in the L or not in the L. So for these decisions, you need to have multiple attributes. Now imagine in the upper corner where you don't have the L, just a normal rectangular facade pattern. There you decide, okay, now I would like to actually first split a couple of times vertically with a repetitive split, but then again in the lowest one on the right, I want to have another L, right? So it's basically you're trying to, or dividing the facade down into multiple fields is some sort, you would have to code that in a recursion, but still on every level of depth you need to have a full set of attributes to actually control the design. And so that to us was the reason, because we wanted to have that control for this particular project. And does that give the answer?
Yes, thanks.
More questions? Sweet. No more questions. Great. Yeah, then I would say we are getting ready for the next presentation.